Welcome to Drive Through History, Holy Land. In the last episode of Drive Through History, we got to witness the religious and ethnic tensions of this land up close and personal. Then we took a brief look at 5,000 years of this land's amazing history, took a visit to the ruins of Jericho, and finally we ended at the tell of ancient Hatzor. Now that we are in northern Israel, it was time to head east to the West Bank. Am I confusing you? In the Palestinian-controlled West Bank, we will visit the ancient cities of Shechem, Samaria, and Shiloh. And we'll learn about the Samaritans, a people group that is familiar to almost everyone because of the parable of the Good Samaritan. Our operating motto in the West Bank was safety third. Kids, you may not use that idea with your mothers. They won't think it's funny. But it was in this way that we comforted ourselves by joking about any potential danger while getting the job done. Speaking of which, did you know that you can't laugh and be afraid at the same time? But I have to admit I was still a bit nervous. The color of the license plate on our Land Rover boldly proclaimed we were not Palestinians. We got suspicious looks almost everywhere that we went. So we kept things moving.
So you want me to drive?
Yeah, just go ahead and drive. The ancient city of Shechem, located in between the mountains of Ebal and Gerizim, is near present-day Nablus and dates back to about 2000 BC. Because the site is now in the Palestinian-controlled West Bank, few tourists ever come to see this impressive ruin. Formerly known as the ancient city at Tel Balata, this was a Canaanite city, and eventually it became the first capital of the northern kingdom of Israel. Shechem is mentioned in ancient Egyptian texts from the 19th century BC, and is also claimed by the patriarchal narratives in Genesis 12 and 33. The book of Genesis states that Abram and later Jacob visited Shechem. In between these visits, Shechem apparently grew and developed substantially. When Jacob returned there around 1700 BC, it was called a city and had been developed with massive walls and a temple. Unfortunately, this important ancient historical site has been neglected and abused. The site is surrounded by a rickety chain-link fence and is not very secure. You know, it's not every day you get to see something that's 4,000 years old. Well, today we get to. It's the ruins of a city that date back to about 2000 BC. I've driven to ancient Shechem, a city that, historically speaking, is one of enormous biblical importance. Now, it's located between Mount Gerizim to the south and Mount Ebal to the north. Now, Shechem, which today is a city called Nablus, was visited by Abraham in Genesis chapter 12, when God promised Abraham the land of Canaan to Abraham and his descendants. Then Joshua built on Mount Ebal an altar to the Lord, the God of Israel, as Moses, the servant of the Lord, had commanded the Israelites. There in the presence of the Israelites, Joshua copied on stones the law of Moses, which he had written. All Israel, aliens and citizens alike, with their elders, officials, and judges, were standing on both sides of the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord, facing those who carried it, the priests, who were Levites. Half of the people stood in front of Mount Gerizim, and half of them in front of Mount Ebal. Joshua read all the words of the law, the blessings and the curses. Years later, after the Israelites had been living in the Promised Land for some time, Joshua returned to these same mountains and again assembled all the tribes of Israel. It's here that Joshua calls the people out. It seems they had forgotten all God did for them, and they started worshiping the local gods of the nations they had just conquered. During the Israelite conquest, the Israelites apparently never had to conquer the city of Shechem because there's no evidence or mention of any battle that took place here. So there was probably some kind of an agreement or covenant that the Israelites made with the people of Shechem. Now, Joshua did gather the 12 tribes of Israel in the Shechem area to recite God's law, along with the curses and blessings that accompany obedience and disobedience. It's here that Joshua used his famous line, "But as for me and my household, we will serve the Lord." The Israelites, powerfully moved by Joshua's speech, recommit themselves to God. Joshua 24 states, "Then the people answered, 'Far be it from us to forsake the Lord, to serve other gods.' It was the Lord our God himself who brought us and our fathers up out of Egypt, from that land of slavery, and performed those great signs before our eyes. He protected us on our entire journey and among all the nations through which we traveled. And the Lord drove out before us all the nations who lived in the land. We too will serve the Lord because he is our God." Scripture tells us that on that day, Joshua made a covenant for the people, and there at Shechem, he drew up for them decrees and laws. Then he took a large stone and set it up there under the tree near the holy place of the Lord. Now this matzebah, or standing stone in front of the temple ruins here in Shechem, is thought by some to be the actual covenant stone erected by Joshua. Joshua 24:27 says, "See, he said to all the people, this stone will be a witness against us. It has heard all the words the Lord has said to us. It will be a witness against you if you are unfaithful to your God." And while we don't know for sure, history records that this matzebah has been standing for thousands of years, and it stands as a witness for us today. Now I'm climbing up into the ruins of the ancient pagan temple to Baal Berith here in Shechem, likely to be the one mentioned in Judges chapter 9. Now it was here that the Israelites, after the death of Gideon, turned away from God and began worshiping the false gods of the Canaanites. Bad idea. Now, in addition to the ruins of this temple, ancient pagan religious artifacts have also been discovered that date back to the time of the Judges, and all confirming the account we have in the book of Judges, that the Israelites were, shall we say, commitment challenged. Yeah, somebody lost this. Hey, buddy. Also at the temple to Baal Berith, silver was taken in order to finance a hostile takeover of Shechem by a false ruler named Abimelech, who claimed that he alone was the rightful king of Israel. Abimelech got by for a few years before he was killed in a rebellion, but not before putting down the rebellion and destroying the city. I guess Granddad's old saying was true. Nothing good can come from a pagan Canaanite temple in ancient Shechem. Just half a mile from here is the site of Jacob's Well, and covering the well is St. Photina Orthodox Church. Over the last 1,650 years or so, This is the fifth church built over the well. The other four churches were destroyed by various calamities, natural and man-made. There is a tradition shared by Christians, Samaritans, Muslims, and Jews that the patriarch Jacob bought this land, placed his tent, and dug this well, and that the well has been in use ever since. It was near here that Jacob's son Joseph was thrown into a cistern and then sold into slavery by his brothers. Jacob's well is mentioned in the New Testament, John chapter 4, verse 6. And it was here that Jesus met the Samaritan woman at the well. Jesus provoked a scandal by speaking with her, because Samaritans and Jews did not associate with each other at that time. But Jesus not only spoke to her, he revealed to her that he was the Messiah. Jesus stayed with the Samaritans for 2 days, and it is recorded in Scripture that because of this, many Samaritans believed. You may recall Joseph from your Bible reading. You know, Joseph, the coat of many colors Joseph, who was dropped into a cistern and sold into Egyptian slavery, only to rise up and become second in command of that nation, forgive his brothers and save them from starvation? Yes, that Joseph. In the year before his death, when he was 109, he asked that his bones would be returned to the pastures where he had kept his father's sheep. So Joseph died at the age of 110. And after they had embalmed him, he was placed in a coffin in Egypt. Exodus 13:19, Moses took the bones of Joseph with him because Joseph had made the Israelites swear an oath. He had said, "God will surely come to your aid, and then you must carry my bones up with you from this place." This would have meant carrying Joseph's bones around for the 40 years of wandering in the desert. And finally, during the conquest period led by Joshua, when the Shechem area was settled by Israelites, Joseph's bones were finally buried. Joseph's journey was over. He was home. And Joseph's bones, which the Israelites had brought up from Egypt, were buried at Shechem in the tract of land that Jacob bought for 100 pieces of silver from the sons of Hamor, the father of Shechem. This became the inheritance of Joseph's descendants. Excavations done in the area have actually found Egyptian artifacts from 1600 to 1400 BC. That's the early part of the enslavement in the Egypt Exodus conquest period. I would encourage you to study Joseph. He is a hugely important figure in the Bible. And while Christians, Jews, Samaritans, and Muslims may not agree on much, they all have recognized this place as Joseph's grave for a long, long time. It is not a safe place to visit, and Jews have been killed trying to worship here. I wanted to linger and meditate about the significance of what it all meant, but I knew we had better leave, so I gave the armed guard one of those nervous, smile, raised eyebrow thank yous and bugged out in the Land Rover. So we skedaddled. Yes, I'm pretty sure that we were skedaddling out of the Shechem area through some windy roads to Samaria. Samaria lies just a few miles northwest of Shechem. Samaria, or Shomron, means something like watchtower in Hebrew. And with these steep slopes going down all sides, you can see where the city got its name. You can also see the strategic importance of a location like this, which held off a number of sieges throughout biblical history. Ancient Samaria is unique. It's the only known major city that was founded by the Israelites. Therefore, the earliest layer of ruins is clearly identified as 9th century Israelite. And heading up that large hill, the roads eventually turned to dirt, and the Land Rover was in its native environment. King Omri of the Israelites purchased this hill from its owner, Shemer, for 2 talents of silver in about 876 BC. Omri built his, quote, city on a hill, and for the next 160 years, Samaria served as the capital of the northern kingdom. Omri's royal citadel, the ruins of which are all around me, were found on the summit of this hill. It was built from a special stone masonry. Now, Omri's son, Ahab, expanded the palace and decorated it with ivory, just as the Bible describes. Excavations here have revealed many ivory items from Ahab's palace. In fact, they found one structure with so much ivory in it that it's been dubbed the Ivory House of Ahab.
Bible accuracy confirmed.
Samaria had the advantage of easy access to the Phoenician coastal cities, which played a large part in the life of King Ahab. However, this turned out to be a bad thing for the Israelites when King Ahab married the evil Phoenician princess Jezebel. Together, they made Baal worship widespread in Israel, and they built a major temple to Baal right here in Samaria. Although the pagan temple to Baal was later destroyed by King Jehu, the reign of Ahab and Jezebel became the nefarious beginning of the northern kingdom's ultimate end. And while Israel lasted for more than 100 years of royal ups and downs, the city of Samaria was destroyed by the Assyrians in 722 BC. So just who were the Samaritans who pop up later in the New Testament of the Bible? Well, not only do Samaritans exist hundreds of years after the fall of Samaria, but it seems that there's a bit of antagonism between them and the Jews, especially when you read accounts such as the Good Samaritan and the Samaritan woman at the well. Well, as we've seen, the Assyrians conquered Samaria and the rest of the northern kingdom in about 722 BC by Sargon II. According to Assyrian records, Sargon led away thousands of Jews and established complete control over the capital city and the remainder of the northern kingdom. New inhabitants were brought in from the east, forming a new population in the area. Later, in the 6th century BC, when the Jewish people returned to Jerusalem to rebuild the temple, the new population of Samaritans in the north wasn't invited to participate. They were considered to be racially mixed and therefore not truly Israelites. So after being snubbed in the rebuilding of the temple in Jerusalem, the Samaritans decided to build their own temple on the top of Mount Gerizim during the Persian period, around the 4th or 5th century BC. This became their holy mountain, and they even changed some passages in the Torah to reflect that. The Samaritan Torah, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, with a twist, are the only 5 books the Samaritans accept. Today, there are less than 750 Samaritan people still living in Israel. They are an endangered people group. When numbers get this low, it is difficult to sustain a population. Imagine that you were a young Samaritan man named Cohen, and you're looking for a prospective wife. Unless you want to date someone with your own last name, there are only 3 other families to choose from. Because of this, religious leaders are reluctantly agreeing to allow converts to marry into Samaritan families. In 2004, a genetic study using Y chromosome and mitochondrial DNA analysis showed that today's Samaritans do in fact descend from the Israelites and Assyrians. Not only have they maintained their lineage, but they continue to practice the commandments and festivals of the Samaritan Torah. Although their temple on Mount Gerizim was destroyed by the Maccabees in the late 2nd century BC, some Samaritan descendants can still be seen worshiping among its ruins today. In 30 BC, Roman Emperor Augustus gave the city of Samaria to Herod the Great, who renamed it Sebastia to honor the emperor. Sebastia is the Greek equivalent of the Latin name Augustus. Now I'm standing on the ruins of a temple that Herod built to Augustus, right over the palace of Omri. He also built a stadium, a forum, an aqueduct, and an incredible colonnaded street with 600 columns lining a half-mile section. This Roman forum here in ancient Samaria was an open area where people would assemble for various things like trade and political activity. Over here at the edge of the forum, archaeologists have excavated a Roman basilica that was later turned into an early Christian church. While much of this area contained the capital structures built by Omri and Ahab, Herod the Great destroyed most of them to construct his huge temple dedicated to Emperor Augustus. Because Samaria was built of stone instead of mud brick, most of the ancient buildings were reused in this later construction. Today, the archaeological site here at Samaria is currently run by nobody. As such, treasure hunters are occasionally found here hunting for and selling ancient coins. Quote, graffiti experts have had their way with this place, and Israeli groups will only come here with an army escort. But having said that, there is a gift shop and restaurant right next to these ruins, and we had a delightful dinner here. The owners were very friendly and put together quite a feast for us. It was extremely delicious. You know, I have had people ask me, is it safe to travel in Israel? My answer is a definite maybe. Here are my thoughts. Israel is a land of a lot of guns, intrigue, and security concerns. In America, it would be unusual to see a bunch of young people with submachine guns. Here, not so much. If you're traveling to Israel with a professional tour group, they are going to be extremely security conscious. The well-traveled tourist areas are well secured, and I would find something else to worry about. We saw busloads of happy pilgrim tourists all over Israel. But if you're going rogue like we did, you are going to have to get more savvy and calculate your comfort with risk. If your idea of a grand adventure is the Bratwurst Festival of Sheboygan, you may not be ready for cultural immersion in the West Bank. While we had no armed security when we traveled, we did have a savvy American guide who lives in Jerusalem and travels constantly throughout this country. To visit some of the most interesting sites, you have to go into the Palestinian territories. So if you want to follow the roads less traveled in Israel, get educated by someone that knows what they're doing. Be smart and stay safe. Well-fed, hot, and a bit drowsy, we hopped in the Land Rover and headed south to Shiloh. By the time we reached Shiloh, the sun was hanging low near the horizon. Shiloh is sacred ground. To think that the very presence of God, the maker of the universe, rested in the relatively small plain that stretched out before us. This is Shiloh. I'm in central Israel, deep in the Palestinian territories of the West Bank. Now, the Israelites placed the tabernacle here at Shiloh during the time of Joshua. Later, during the Judges period, the Ark of the Covenant was apparently housed in a more permanent structure, a sort of precursor to the temple. Now, the city of Shiloh remained a major center of worship for over 300 years, until the time of the kingdom. When archaeologists excavated this site, they dated the public buildings to the mid-12th century BC. But lower on the tell is a larger, more intriguing flat area. Let's check it out. This area, which measures about 400 feet by 77 feet, was identified by an early explorer named Wilson. This area would accommodate the measurements described for the tabernacle, which probably measured approximately 75 feet wide and 150 feet long. The tabernacle was the tent which contained the Ark of the Covenant before the temple was constructed. Inside of the tabernacle was the holy place, and in the furthest back section, accessible only to the high priest, was the Holy of Holies. If you look at a drawing of what scholars believe the tabernacle looked like, you will see that the tent structure was supported by a long series of evenly placed poles. And here we find a series of post holes chiseled into the rock, possibly for those support posts. Now, this evidence, along with the measurements, has led many scholars to believe that the tabernacle rested in this area behind me. Eli was a high priest and one of the last judges before the era of the kings. You can read in 1 Samuel 4 that at the end of Eli's life, the Israelites were defeated here at Shiloh by the Philistines. Standard Bible chronology shows that that event happened somewhere in the first half of the 11th century BC. And archaeological evidence discovered here at Shiloh shows that this city was destroyed and abandoned about the mid-11th century. So once again, we see that there is agreement between the book of Samuel and the archaeological record. Shechem, covenants, Abraham, Jacob, Joseph, Samaria, Jesus at the well, and God's very presence in the Ark of the Covenant at Shiloh. The amount of history recorded in Genesis, Exodus, Joshua, and Samuel that took place in this very small area in northern Israel is amazing indeed. I have to say that I was blown away by the amount of archaeological evidence that has been uncovered from those ancient times. As the sun set over Shiloh, I finally had a few quiet moments to begin to understand what I had seen. The day's journey in the West Bank was a huge faith-building experience for me. I was thankful. Now I'm climbing up into the ruins of the ancient pagan temple, the temple to Baal, which is similar to Baal. Baal was his lesser-known half-brother deity who enjoyed things like skiing and hiking and long walks in the rain. Samaria lies just a few miles northwest of a large motor that's making me mad. Samaria lies just a few miles northwest of Shechem.